Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming. We didn't expect so many people. After all, it's 5 p.m. We are from Angara, and today we'll talk about something that is not new, but we'll give our take on that. It's about compromise assessment. And why our take on that? We believe it's important to share our approaches to this service because there's no cookie-cutter solution. And we want to take a different view at this and how we used this service ourselves and why we wanted to do that in the first place. A little bit of background. About a year ago, we received a phishing email, and you can tell me, okay, and so what? There are phishing emails. Some make it through the email firewall, some don't. But it's not often that you see beautiful phishing letter. The print may be small here, but it's really well structured. There are no obvious mistakes or typos. And if you look at the domain name, it is very similar to our legit domain name. There's a difference of only one symbol, which is a dash sign. So there's a lot of desire to click on this email. The name of the person indeed works in our company, even though in HR. So that's a 10 out of 10, and the email is sent to IT department. So that's a work of art of a phishing letter. In the attachments, there were executables disguised as documents. I don't want to analyze this email. We discussed this at length at Haber, and we wanted to do this for a broad audience, and so we have described this inside out. We talked about analyzing email headings, and we talked about what our SOC did. Because we are the customers of our own SOC, we also described their response and what they did together with our admins. Okay, so we get this phishing letter. We've done whatever it takes. But still, this one looks nice, and we sort of were concerned after this. And by the way, in terms of the malware that the email had, it wasn't too sophisticated malware. No. It was a scaled-down stealer, rather a profiler that gathers information in a compromised system, the kind of information system that processes the software installed to understand whether that is an artificial environment or not, and to understand how interesting the compromised system is. So yes, it's a profiler, but it has a feature of downloading further malware. So if the attacker sees that it is potentially interesting, they could download something else. And okay, so the story is not yet over, even though the incident was closed, but we were starting to lose sleep after this incident. And who are we? Myself is Lada Antipova, and this is my colleague Nikita Sinkevich, and you can read about us on this slide, but essentially both of us, we come from SOC. The only difference is that I work in an in-house SOC for a long time, and Nikita worked in a SOC that was providing services to other organizations. That's an important detail, we'll talk about it later. But currently we work in one SOC, and not only we help our customers to investigate cases, but we help respond to incidents to external customers, that is external to our organization. As I said, the topic is not new, and compromise assessment in itself is quite popular. It's popular in the international market, in the Russian market, and why that is important because there are quite good materials in the Russian language. So we recommend to read these to get a full picture. Our colleagues from BuyZone a couple of years presented this service and explained what it is about, how it is different from other SecOps practices. And the second presentation is again from our colleagues that was presented at last year's PhD. The guys really took a deep dive into technical details, explained what stack they use, etc. To summarize about what compromise assessment is, that is looking for traces of compromise. And when you need that, you want to do that when you have a suspicion that something is going on in your infrastructure, and you can do some preliminary analysis and really try and inspect your infrastructure to see if things are going well. But if you heard presentations from other tracks, you may have heard that attacks through contractors are quite widespread. So when you merge with an organization or if you change a contractor, this service can also be used. In my practice, we had instances when a customer approached us to inspect the contractor that they wanted to work with. Clearly, that's not for everyone. That was a small organization. It's not that you inspect 3,000 host machines. They only had some 30 machines, but they were prepared to pay for that. But it's a good practice before you let anyone into your infrastructure to check them first. As part of our presentation, for the most part, we'll be talking about our own vision, because the compromise assessment is quite an extended in-time service. You've got to analyze a lot of logs, a lot of information in a short period of time and try and find something. As I explained, there is no cookie-cutter approach, and we wanted to supplement the colleagues that presented before us and to focus on where we differ and where we think alike. As I explained previously, we will talk about specific examples, and we'll take ourselves as an example how we approached compromise assessment and what we came up to. Okay, how did we understand that we needed this service? Let's go back to my intro, the phishing email. Again, using contractors, and regardless how well you are protected, how secure you are, and we know that we are quite secure, still you want to review how you're doing periodically. And this could also be used as a tool to improve your security processes. Every time I take up this service, as you analyze large volume of information, you come across difficulties of obtaining this information. Some bits and pieces are missing, and this can be further fine-tuned. Finally, when doing compromise assessment for ourselves, because we happen to be the clients of ourselves in this case, so we can be more lax about the deadlines, we can do some testing to see what tool works better. So that's a good chance for us to improve ourselves. And finally, no system is safe. I support the vision that it's better to operate from a premise that you have already been hacked. This sounds like a threat hunting premise, but it's a good premise. Okay, anyway, let's see where this brought us. When we put together a plan of today's presentation, we saw that really the plan follows the checklist that we use for this service. First is building a landscape of threats, and not just us saying that this is the trend of 2024, so we want to check that. Well, new-centric approach is a good thing, but we're not talking about that. Rather, we've got to think about what's relevant to our organization, our industry, our country. And why that is important? Because that has a bearing on priorities, and Nikita will talk more about that. Next, inventory or stock taking or mapping. Apparently, you don't want to reinvent inventory taking. You've got 2 months' time, and why build something new? It's impossible to do this in 2 months. But still, we've got to understand what we would have to work with. And also, doing compromise assessment in an infrastructure that you know well, there are some fine details. You know quite a lot of things. Sometimes you can take a shortcut and ask an admin. So there were things that we placed particular focus on, and we'll talk about it. So that was inventory taking. Next, search approaches. That is the key element based on which we prioritize and set criteria for our search. First, these are IOCs. Second, those are tools. And thirdly, TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Not just open MITRE and see whatever they have. We'll take a more granular approach. And finally, based on all the previous items, we put all of that together and review. And Nikita will talk more about that. And finally, we prepare a report. And we'll see what this report includes. And I will now pass the floor to Nikita. Okay, so the first is threat landscape. Let's talk about what it is. It's an assessment of all threats relevant for a particular sector. On top of the text description, we prepared visualizations from cyber intelligence and from our response reports. And here's what we see in the slide. The first visualization is the heat map. This discusses the most popular TTPs of attackers. This is needed for us to come up with some ideas, some hypotheses, to understand what it is that we want to look for in the data streams, what we want to look for. Second is the relevant tools used by our adversaries, and this includes not just malware, but also dual-purpose utilities, such as PSExec, for example. These tools we use again to create hypotheses, and we'll talk about that later, how we use this landscape. The next stage is inventory taking. As Lada explains, we looked at our own infrastructure, we had a knowledge of it, we had the current topology, we had admins whom we could approach and ask. But sometimes when you approach a third party, we can see that the customer doesn't have current information about their infrastructure. they may be missing some knowledge. So we decided not to skip this stage, and we divided it into two parts, external and internal inventory taking. External inventory taking was quite straightforward. We played hackers, we were given a domain. We tried to understand the full external attack surface. And the internal inventory taking was that first we wanted to understand the critical assets and the security tools. We proceeded from information provided by our admins, and also as we scanned our network, we validated what we had. We were also interested in user machines. We were looking for endpoints that were not accounted for. And we did internal scanning more than once, because user machines can be turned off, switched off, so that makes their detection more difficult. We did several scanning cycles. We put together a table, we compared to what the admins had, and that was the end of inventory taking. And we could proceed to what it is that we're going to collect. The collected data we subdivided into several buckets. First, data from the endpoints. And here it depended on what the endpoint was. If that was a critical asset, then we gathered the whole data set. Depending on what a forensic expert wants. But for critical assets, we connected as much data as we could. For user machines, we gathered less data because there are more such machines, and we didn't want to drown in the data had we collected more information. The network, well, that is quite straightforward. We gathered alerts and logs from security tools and servers that are involved in information exchange between users. Perimeter. We saw, we identified what was sticking out, and we gathered logs from those hosts, because those systems work with external users. Public. Here, our brand security department did their job, who look for leaked passwords and other leaked information. After we have determined what we want to collect, we need to understand how we're going to analyze it. The first approach is compromise indicator-based approach, or IOC-based approach. An IOC is a small bit of information that could highlight malicious activity in the network. When an attack happens, the attacker leaves traces as a result of their activity. The response specialist investigating this attack finds these traces and finds those IOCs, and those could be hashes, IP addresses, other artifacts. And after the investigation, the specialist puts together a response report where there's a separate section that gives an overview of all the IOCs. And after the investigation is over, this report goes to the cyber intelligence databases. We did leverage cyber intelligence to gather all available compromise indicators. And once we have gathered them, we started filtering them, reducing the pool that we will use for searching, identifying the more relevant IOCs. For example, we abandoned the ICS-related indicators because this is not our industry. And as an output, we had a pool of our IOCs. The next approach is a tool-based approach, based on the tools that are trending. Attackers use the software that sometimes can go undetected. For example, dual-purpose utilities, such as PSExec that we mentioned previously. Such tools we put together in a table, discussing the trails that a particular tool the traces that a particular tool can leave. For PSExec, we came up with at least 4 trails, and for other tools, there were also there was also information in the table.
Подход, основанный на поведении злоумышленника.
TTP-based approach.
Наша табличка Майтра, наш хитмап.
Here we can leverage our heat map that we developed previously. At this stage, we develop hypotheses based on the attacker's behavior. We take our heat map, and based on the brightest boxes,
то, как вел себя злоумышленник, соответственно.
From the brightest ones to the less bright ones, we start to develop theories of potential attackers' behavior. We described some further details and forensic artifacts that could support a potential hypothesis, and we have developed some 70 such theories. And that was quite an onerous process in terms of paperwork. But that is important because that's a plan. And you can't do much without a plan. And after we have set the ground rules for analysis, we proceed to the actual data gathering. We start gathering the telemetry and all the artifacts that we have described. And here's what we did in our infrastructure. It is covered with EDR agents, and what this gives us. The EDR agents help us launch the tools of interest. And the first one we used was Tor Lite. It receives as input the IOC database, and it does scanning. If it finds something, it writes an entry into the log file, and we take this log file for analysis. The next tool is Cape. That one we used for Windows-based machines. The benefits of it is that with Cape, you can gather different volumes of forensic artifacts. As I explained, for critical assets, we did a broader study. For user machines, we used a different config that gathered much less telemetry. CAT scale and UAC, similar to CAPE, gather forensic artifacts from Linux and Unix-based systems. One thing I want to note, that after we have gathered all this data, we put them in a separate storage, so that during subsequent analysis, including automated analysis, we didn't lose anything. So that all those automated analysis tools did not corrupt the data. Perimeter telemetry.
Здесь нам очень помог тот факт, что у нас есть CM.
Here we leverage the fact that we have a CM which gathers logs from various systems and logs alerts. We didn't do much manual work here. All we had to do was to look up CM and analyze what it has. Because we have a SOC, this CM has a lot of correlation rules, and many alerts were generated, including on perimeter-related and network-related telemetry. We didn't rely on what was provided by our analysts. We validated everything ourselves, although there was a temptation of not to duplicate work, but that's not the forensic way of doing things. Next, a hypothesis proof of all of that telemetry. That is always the most onerous process, and I'll explain why. We had the CM. Everything worked well. Most of the logs go in there. Most of the time we spent there. But still, we ended up with a data set which didn't find its way into the CM. We had to analyze the data that didn't make its way there. We use a great technology, no rocket science. Very simply, we use ELK. So what we put there, we put in information related to executables. User that we thought whether we wanted to collect it or not, but I decided that we want to do that. Why? Because these artifacts would most likely contain the traces of attackers. There's a paradox in malware that you can see in the slide. For malware to do something, it has to run, it has to be run. Although it can hide, it can sit in your machine for ages without being run, but at one point in time it has to run, and that would leave a trace. After those artifacts, we gather logs into ELK. We build an index out of them, and we also run them through Sigma-based tools and also put that into ELK. We enrich all of this through CTI, and we end up with a forensic CM. And finally, Tor alerts that indicate
подходом на
That's
основе индикаторов компрометации.
something was detected based on IOCs.
Командочки, как,
So you can see some little commands
хостах.
we need to run at hosts.
Что вообще тут происходит?
Okay, what's going on here?
Мы видим,
In the
сводки, да,
elk,
понятно, что
we can
произошло.
see some
Но это
trips,
оказалось
so
дико
meaning
пугающая
that
тема.
something was found, but
Все
there
это и так
were
знают.
too many false positives
Нужно
there,
было дополнительно
obviously,
анализировать,
and we had to analyze this
обогащать
to
событиями
enrich
из
it
нашего второго
with
CM.
events from the second CM.
Далеко не всегда означает,
And
что если у вас что-то нашлось
well,
по
if
индикатору
you
компрометации,
have
это
an
плохо.
indicator tripped, it doesn't mean necessarily that this is going to be important. It most probably is a false positive.
Time to CMing.
Okay,
Здесь нам пришлось
now it's time
немного,
to CMing.
вернуться в прошлое.
So this brings us to the past, some flashbacks here. So we started working in CM, we started verifying the theories we had built before.
Мы нашли много всякого,
We found a lot of stuff,
всяких фалсов.
a lot of false results.
Как в прошлом аналитикам было
And just like in the past,
немножечко раздражительно даже
we were
в каком-то плане
a little bit annoyed
из-за того, что у нас
because
организация, да,
we
у
are
нас есть
an information security
люди, которые,
organization,
что-то
but
тестируют,
we see people testing things, correlation files. If we talk about the blue team, we have pen testers
что-то там пентестят,
who pen test things, and this goes to CM.
и ты сидишь и думаешь,
And
кто это
you
был, злоумышленник или нет.
are there thinking whether it was an attacker or not.
И сидишь как сырок в
So,
микроволновке,
you know,
тебе не нравится.
you're sitting there, you are
Админская
kind
активность
of
на этих хостах. Мы никогда так долго не общались с админами.
smoldering with range. Yeah, we had to spend quite some time talking to admins when we run our compromise assessment.
Активность какая-то,
Then the
это,
user activity.
potential unwanted programs.
So these are potential unwanted programs and open
Для паролей в открытом
passwords.
виде у нас
For the
существует
open
отдельное правило
passwords,
корреляции,
we have a correlation rule
выплевывает как раз-таки на них
which
алерты.
shows alerts for them.
Пришел на помощь как
And
раз-таки
here our SOC helped.
Когда у пользака
When the user,
зафиксирован пароль в
so when the
открытом виде,
tool shows the open password, the SOC starts talking to the guy through the mail, and we are also copied there. We see all this. So in one screen we see the Outlook, and the second screen shows the CMs with all these matches, and we were sitting there comparing things. Okay, real-time telemetry. Okay, we retrospectively looked at all the alerts, and we also remembered that time runs, and telemetry also goes to CM, and it was a little bit more straightforward here. We had a lot of correlation rules. We looked at all of them, and we didn't find something outstanding.
Вся вот эта работа в CM, она
All of that effort in CM reminds us of the threat hunter activity, and you might think that this is the same, but this is not actually the case. At this stage, the question might be, what's the difference? Okay, threat hunting is threat hunting, but there are some nuances here, because threat hunting is a continuous process you build and run in a row, so this is a never-ending story. But there are some nuances. You should kind of grow to do threat hunting. So I'm not talking about maturity and other things, but threat hunting should run on something. Yeah, you can try to use logs, even if you don't have extended audit, but is it going to be useful? Yeah, to an extent, but I don't think that you'll get too much. And at this stage, compromise assessment is there to give us a helping hand. As Nikita put it, you gather forensic artifacts to look deeper. Okay, it's cool when, as we have in our case, you have ADRs for the infrastructure, but sometimes you come and see that there is no any extended audit or something. And you can use forensic tools and artifacts to bring many things to the surface. And there is another subjective benefit. As far as I see it, compromise assessment is usually done by response experts, those who deal with incidents all the time. This is what we do, at least, in our company. And this is just another chance to have a look at this. If you have a monitoring system, you can have a different perspective of logs, because the perspective of the SOC analyst or the incident respondents, so they have different perspectives. So why not having a look at a different angle at this? Okay, here is the report. Well, summing up, what do we have as the result of it? So the heat maps and other beautiful pictures, our threats landscape, which is also supported by a text description, beautiful pictures. So we show what we gather, where we gather from, and how we gather it. Then some conclusions. Okay, we have a lot of hypotheses. We say what we found, what we haven't found, and the things we haven't found can be also used to our advantage, because this can be used for our recommendations. So even following compromise assessment, you always write recommendations, because you always have things to fine-tune and twist and tweak. And also the incident response report. If you find any compromise traces, then we run an investigation. If it is active, we go through the 6 response stages, and even if we understand that this is an old thing, so the incident is kind of old and forgotten and there are no traces, this is still documented in detail, and we tell every client what they should be monitoring and what had happened. Okay. What's the final conclusion? I don't know whether the director of our SOC is listening to me or not. I can say that we haven't found anything, be it good or bad. I mean, clear compromise traces. But as one of our clients told me recently, he said, well, for you, you are just fans of this. You are driven. You want to find things. Well, indeed, that's our job. We are there to find things. That's the way it works. But anyway, we haven't found any traces, but this has been a lot of work anyway. And as Nikita put it, in terms of our paper safety, we still generate report with a lot of hypotheses, and you can give it to the SOC so they can touch base and see whether they're moving in the right direction, and they can see whether they have, based on their detections and hunts and rules and so on. So we also have a peace of mind for some time, so that our phishing didn't lead to something bad, and we can have a peace of mind. Okay. The slide I don't really like. This is my channel. This is my personal channel. It's not commercial. So these are my things. Thank you much for your attention, and I'm ready to take your questions.
Я не знаю, как этим пользоваться.
I don't know how to use it.
Вот,
типа,
все.
Откуда сверху, снизу?
Так, подожди. Ох. Да, давай вот прям, мне вот просто нравится про топ. Топ — это вообще мои любимые истории. Вот топ-10 артефактов Linux, потом...
The top 10 Linux artifacts, then for Windows, and so on. So I think that Nikita has already answered this. Number one, we are guided by the artifacts of execution or presence in the system, because this gives us a chance to prioritize this stuff differently. That's what Nikita talked about. Oh, so many questions.
На какой отвечать?
Я не знаю. Так, ну давай. По каким критериям выбирали актуальные
The criteria used for picking TTPs. Well, we have the cyber intelligence platform you can use to put in your industry and your country and build all of this. So if you're talking about cybercrime, well, they don't care that much. They want to benefit. And again, if we talk about APT, there are some nuances here to keep in mind. I like this one, when the network is compromised. How to restore your reputation. I think the best way, which also works when you respond to incidents, when the company recognizes its mistake, saying, yes, we've been compromised, we did this and this, you should do this and that. This is the best way to approach us. But when companies try to hide this and to talk about reputational risks, well, this is not good, especially when they have this trusted relationship attack. And we often see it, how they breach the contractor, and few people tell the clients that they have been attacked and breached. And I think you should mention it, otherwise the consequences will be even harsher. Okay, another one. You pick.
Так, Максим пишет, как...
Maxim's question, how to build compromise assessment if the infrastructure is covered by 100% antivirus protection, covering IO tools, and when you regularly do probability measurement and CM identified the tools. Okay, indeed, just as we described in terms of our checklist, we have a similar situation. We have EDRs and we have antiviruses, and all of that is similarly covered, but the feature of the compromise assessment is that you cover the threats which are important for your industry, the ones you established when you were building the threat landscape. Okay, thank you, Andrei. Another question. What were the experts which were used to assess your infrastructure, and how do you determine the level of an expert you need for investigations? Well, again, it depends, and this also works in case of response management. We understand that, well, you should be ready. When I just joined this industry, I remember my first incident, and I'm glad that I had my senior colleagues with me, because it seems so ugly and horrible, and you need to talk to the clients. Well, we understand that, well, if you're a junior, you cannot fight alone, so you're not going there alone. So we deal with middle plus, and I also participate as a team lead for my team. Anything else? Yes, so many questions indeed. A cool question from Ivan. How many teams, how many human hours invested? Did it become a process? Well, how many teams participated? Okay, only our team. How many human hours? Well, if you don't deal with debugging, so I think we needed 2.5 months, and we also had to write the report. By the way, the client can also share some specific questions, and then we we add this to the report.
Собираете ли вы данные MFT?
Do you gather the MFT data? When, as I said, we don't gather all the data from the hosts, we are guided by their criticality. So we took the full triage from the critically important hosts, but not from the client machines. How do you find open password files? This is another interesting story. We came across them when we ran compromise assessment after testing some hypotheses, and sometimes they were just met along the way. We know that our SOC has a rule, and we usually had to double check this to see whether our IT department kicked people around if they found some open passwords.
Вот этот?
Какой хочешь.
Ладно. Привет. А вы собирали весь триаж и
Did you take all triage analysis into one huge system, or did you have dozens of small ones and then you brought the results together in an Office app? Well, it depends on the infrastructure. In our case, we had two systems. Our CM and the YALC were built.
Well,
if in the network you have a lot of protection and a lot of CMs, maybe you don't need the YALC. But usually the CM and the YALC or the ELK would suffice. How to build compromise assessment if your infrastructure is 100% covered? Okay, I have taken this one. Well, I really like it. Covered to 100%. I like it. I adore it. When they come and say, yeah, it's 100% covered. That's what I really like. You know, you could say just when you respond to an incident and the client tells you, we only have mail, we don't have anything else exposed, but then you start looking into this and draw conclusions.
Почему вы получили фишинг, показанный в начале выступления? Вы не отслеживаете регистрацию похожих доменов и было ли уведомление?
Registration of similar domains. Do you keep track of this? Was this notified with the notification? Yes, indeed, we had a banner. So why we got this phishing? Well, because registration there was very, the rate of registration of the domain was minimal. Well, this really works. These attackers register a domain just before the attack. Well, at some stage maybe we didn't consider this. Well, say just a couple of days, and that's why we got it. Another thing to mention is that it was a good phishing attack. They had AdKims set properly and so on. So this guy was well prepared and well equipped.
Надо было все-таки по порядку идти. Насколько сильно? Давай.
Где?
Про индикатор.
Насколько сильно можно автоматизировать поиск?
How can you automate the search for compromise indicators? Well, it's all subject to your creativity. You can automate almost anything. And in our case, we had the Torite. Then we used the Python script to comment through to get rid of the garbage and feed it into the YALC. And at this stage, we need an analyst to analyze, see whether it's a false positive or not. Talking about automation in terms of the indicators of compromise, well, the processes are built in the SOC, and in the compromise assessment are different. So we have this SOC, and all those indicators are there continuously. So they get this information from cyber intelligence, and they have a standalone system which will run real-time checks on this.
В нашем случае
Well, in our
наша
case,
была цель быть максимально
our goal
объективными.
was to be as objective as possible, and that's it.
Поверьте мне, это очень сложно,
Well,
когда ты по
please
сути
trust me.
делаешь двойную работу,
You are
но
kind of
по-другому
doing
тут
this
никак.
double job,
В этом
but
вся и разница.
that's unavoidable.
В чем разница Kitscale, Linux и UAC? Почему два коллектора для Linux
Why
и
do you
один
need two
коллектор для
collectors
Cape?
for
Вопрос,
Linux
кстати,
and one
классный.
collector for Cape?
Во-первых, потому
That's a cool
что
question.
UAC собирает
Number
именно
one,
для
UAC collects
систем.
for
Это уже
Unix
позволяет
systems,
расширить
so this
зону
way
его
you can
работы,
expand
но
its
тут
work,
нужно именно погружаться в
but
детали,
you
как
should go
работает
into
Kitscale,
detail
как
to see
работает
how
UAC.
Kitscale and how
Они
UAC
собирают мало того, что
work.
немного разные данные,
They
плюс считают
collect
немного
different
по-разному
data,
хэши.
and
И у
they
них есть
count
прикрученные
hashes differently,
условно свои
and
модули.
they have their own add-on
Поэтому мы
modules.
решили как бы совместить два в
We
одном,
decided
не
to
изобретать
merge
велосипед
them,
и использовать просто
not to reinvent the wheel,
максимальный
and
набор, который могли.
use the largest toolkit. We got one collector for Cape. As Nikita mentioned,
один из любимых
so
инструментов
Cape is one of the favorite tools for forensic experts. You can flexibly collect what you want,
На самом деле это
easily
не
set
супер много.
and
Можно
really
использовать
reliable.
Velociraptor, который
You can
может
also
также
use
собирать еще что-то. Вообще
Velociraptor.
на ваше
You
усмотрение.
can bring
Главное
together.
знать,
And
что с
so
этим
it's up to
делать.
you. You should
Опять же,
know
важный
what you're
момент,
doing.
то,
That's
что,
what matters.
как бы я сказала, знаете, бойтесь трендхантерских
And
тулзов.
please
Мы, наверное,
stay
не
away
сильно
from
много внимания этому уделили,
threat
но
hunting
Никита это
tools.
сразу отметил, то, что, опять же, все те же журналы
Well, all
мы в
this
сыром виде все равно храним. Почему? Потому
logs,
что
for instance,
трендхантинг-тулзы тоже имеют
stored
свойство
in a
где-то
raw
запороть свою работу,
way,
в итоге
because
у вас на выходе
headhunting
будет,
tools
например, 2
sometimes
мегабайта вместо 20,
give you
например, условно.
2 megabytes
И,
left out of
опять
20.
же,
So they sometimes go wrong. And
какая-то повторяемость, поэтому
there should be some
так просто не доверять трендхантерским тулзам
way to replicate the results.
собирать это все.
Don't trust the headhunter tools, so please collect the data in its raw form.
Это мы все ответили. Ну, и тут вопрос, я его назову, но мне кажется, он уже как раз и был, мы его не раз упоминали.
Well,
То есть скопа. Делали ли вы предположения о группировках, которые
Roll the scope. Did you think about the groups which might have attacked you? Were you looking for those groups? Well, that's the idea behind it. When we built our heat map, we understand we cannot put all the procedures there. But this way, you can ask specific hunts, like specific folders you'll be looking through. Sometimes attackers have some preset directories. Well, it's all case by case. So this would be groups or activity clusters or whatever. So we had to group them all and to have a heat map, shared heat map. So it's very difficult to show everything we did through this threat landscape building process.
Так.
Это может быть?
Давай.
Нет?
Ну, попробуем.
Можно ли полностью поручить компьютеру инвентаризацию, сбор триажей и так далее?
Can you ask the computer to do inventarization or inventory taking, trash making? So do you mean what? So we manually launch all the trash tools for inventory taking. Well, we do scan all this manually, so we launch all the tools and we write all the commands, and then the computer does the rest.
Так, ну и пришло время выбирать футболочку.
So is it time to pick the winner for the T-shirt?
Нам сказали, что надо заранее спрашивать, если представитель
Okay, we need
в чате. Ой, не в чате.
Check whether the person asking the question is present here. Okay, the top 5 artifacts for CA.
Коза Ностра.
Cosa Nostra.
А что он ушел уже?
Maybe he's gone.
Так, ну так супер сложно.
Okay, but it's difficult.
Ну давайте про какого уровня специалистов.
Okay, then what level of experts, juniors or middles? Okay, this is Andrei. A question from Andrei. Andrei, are you here? I think. Oh, we have.
Да-да-да,
We have Andrei with us. Great. Here is your T-shirt. Thank you very much indeed, and have a good evening.